There is a place in the Nevada desert that the United States government will not confirm exists on any official map. You will not find it labeled on Google Earth. You will not find it in any public federal land registry. If you call the Department of Defense and ask about it directly, you will get a non-answer so practiced and so precise that it sounds almost rehearsed. The roads leading to it are unmarked. The airspace above it is permanently restricted, and the people who work there, the ones who drive in through gates watched by armed guards in unmarked vehicles, they do not tell their families exactly what they do for a living. They sign agreements that follow them for the rest of their lives. They carry clearances so high that even some senior military officers do not have access to the full picture of what happens behind those fences. And yet this place is real. It has been real for over 7 decades. It has shaped the course of American military history more than almost any other location on the planet. Weapons were born there that changed the balance of global power. Aircraft were developed there that redefined what was possible in the sky. Technologies were tested there that the rest of the world would not learn about for 20 or 30 years after the fact. And right now, today, something is being built, tested, or flown at that location that the public does not know about yet. This is the story of the most secret military installation on the face of the earth. This is the story of what lives behind the no trespassing signs, behind the restricted airspace, behind the silence. This is the story of the base that does not officially exist. Before we go any further, if you are new here and you want stories that go deeper than the headlines, that pull back the curtain on the things most people never get to see, subscribe right now. It is free. It takes 2 seconds. And once you are in, you will never look at the world the same way again. Let us start at the beginning. Because to understand what this place is today, you have to understand how it was born. And the story of its birth is one of the most fascinating chapters in the entire history of American military power. It starts in the early years of the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race that was not just about nuclear weapons. It was about intelligence. It was about knowing. The American government needed to know what the Soviets were building. They needed to know the locations of their military installations, their air bases, their missile sites. There is a place in the Nevada desert that the United States government will not confirm exists on any official map. You will not find it labeled on Google Earth. You will not find it in any public federal land registry. If you call the Department of Defense and ask about it directly, you will get a non-answer so practiced and so precise that it sounds almost rehearsed. The roads leading to it are unmarked. The airspace above it is permanently restricted, and the people who work there, the ones who drive in through gates watched by armed guards in unmarked vehicles, they do not tell their families exactly what they do for a living. They sign agreements that follow them for the rest of their lives. They carry clearances so high that even some senior military officers do not have access to the full picture of what happens behind those fences. And yet this place is real. It has been real for over 7 decades. It has shaped the course of American military history more than almost any other location on the planet. Weapons were born there that changed the balance of global power. Aircraft were developed there that redefined what was possible in the sky. Technologies were tested there that the rest of the world would not learn about for 20 or 30 years after the fact. And right now, today, something is being built, tested, or flown at that location that the public does not know about yet. This is the story of the most secret military installation on the face of the earth. This is the story of what lives behind the no trespassing signs, behind the restricted airspace, behind the silence. This is the story of the base that does not officially exist. Before we go any further, if you are new here and you want stories that go deeper than the headlines, that pull back the curtain on the things most people never get to see, subscribe right now. It is free. It takes 2 seconds. And once you are in, you will never look at the world the same way again. Let us start at the beginning. Because to understand what this place is today, you have to understand how it was born. And the story of its birth is one of the most fascinating chapters in the entire history of American military power. It starts in the early years of the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race that was not just about nuclear weapons. It was about intelligence. It was about knowing. The American government needed to know what the Soviets were building. They needed to know the locations of their military installations, their air bases, their missile sites, their nuclear facilities. And at that moment in history, they had almost no reliable way to get that information. Spy satellites did not yet exist. Human intelligence assets inside the Soviet Union were few and dangerously exposed. Conventional reconnaissance aircraft could not fly high enough or fast enough to penetrate Soviet airspace without being shot down. The window of ignorance was enormous, and in Washington, in the intelligence community, In the highest levels of the military establishment, the fear of what that ignorance might be hiding was growing by the day. So a decision was made, a classified decision. A program was authorized at the absolute highest levels of the United States government. The mission was simple in concept and staggeringly difficult in execution. Build an aircraft that could fly so high and so far that no existing Soviet weapon could touch it. An aircraft that could photograph the entire Soviet military establishment from above the reach of radar, above the reach of missiles, above the reach of fighters. And do it without the Soviets ever being able to stop it. The contract went to a small, secretive division of a major American aerospace company. A division whose very name would eventually become synonymous with the impossible. They called themselves the Skunk Works. And what they built in response to that contract would become one of the most legendary aircraft in history. But they could not build it just anywhere. They needed a test site that was remote enough that no civilian would ever stumble onto it. They needed airspace that could be completely controlled and completely denied to outside eyes. They needed a place where workers could live and operate in total secrecy for months at a time without outside contact. They needed, in short, a base that did not officially exist, and they found it in the Nevada desert, a dry lake bed called Groom Lake. Flat, remote, surrounded by mountains on multiple sides, sitting inside a vast government land withdrawal that gave it a natural buffer against unwanted visitors. It was nearly perfect. Workers were flown in on unmarked aircraft. Housing was constructed in temporary structures. The runway was extended onto the hard, flat surface of the lake bed itself. Perimeter security was established, and the work began. The aircraft they built at that location would change history. It flew at altitudes that Soviet radar systems struggled to track. It flew at speeds that Soviet interceptors could not match. It photographed Soviet military installations with a clarity and a completeness that American intelligence had never before possessed. It gave American leaders a window into the Soviet military machine that was so detailed, so comprehensive, that entire strategic calculations were revised as a result. And for years, the Soviets knew something was flying over their territory. They tracked it on radar. They logged the overflights in official protests. But they could not catch it. And the United States, officially, denied its existence entirely. When Soviet radar operators reported the aircraft to their superiors, the reports were met with confusion and frustration. What they were seeing did not match anything in the known inventory of American aircraft. It flew too high. It was too fast. It defied the expected parameters of existing technology, and that was precisely the point. The base that did not exist was producing aircraft that could not exist, tested by pilots who officially were not there, funded through budget lines that did not appear in any public document. This was the beginning of a tradition of operating in the space between the known and the unknown, between the official and the deniable, between the map and the territory that the map refuses to show. That tradition did not end when the first program concluded. It deepened, it expanded, it grew more sophisticated, more capable, and in many ways more extraordinary, with every decade that passed. Because after the first aircraft came another, and after that one came another. And with every new program, with every new generation of technology being tested on that dry lake bed in the Nevada desert, the base grew. Infrastructure expanded. Underground facilities were added. New runways were constructed. The workforce grew. The security apparatus became more sophisticated, more layered, more absolute, and the secrecy became more total. Today, the installation that began as a temporary test site for a single classified aircraft program has grown into something that bears almost no resemblance to its humble origins. It is one of the most heavily secured pieces of real estate on the planet. The restricted airspace around it, formally designated as Restricted Area 4808 North, covers hundreds of square miles of Nevada sky. That airspace is not just restricted in the normal sense of the word. It is what aviators call a permanent prohibited area, meaning that unlike most restricted airspace, which can sometimes be accessed by civilian aircraft with appropriate clearances, this zone is closed, always, to everyone, without exception. The ground perimeter is watched by sensors and surveillance systems that most people will never know the full extent of. There are cameras, there are motion detectors, there are sensors buried in the approach roads. There are patrols by armed security contractors in unmarked vehicles that bear no military markings, no government plates, no insignia of any kind. These guards operate under rules of engagement that have never been made fully public, but accounts from people who have gotten close to the perimeter, journalists, researchers, curious civilians, all tell a consistent story. You approach, you are observed. You stop at the boundary, you are warned. You cross the boundary, things escalate very quickly and very seriously. There have been accounts of people being detained, questioned, and released with a level of seriousness that makes absolutely clear that this is not a place where curiosity is tolerated. The nearest publicly accessible point to the installation is a stretch of Nevada State Road that runs through the small community of Rachel, Nevada, and passes near enough to the perimeter that on certain clear days, with certain angles of light, it is possible to see some of the structures on the base from the road. That stretch of road has become one of the most famous pieces of pavement in America. It has been visited by thousands of people over the years, drawn by curiosity, by the culture of secrecy that surrounds the base, by the decades of strange stories that have accumulated around this place like sediment. And those stories are worth examining, because among all the things that make this installation remarkable, perhaps none is more remarkable than the way it has embedded itself into American popular culture. For decades, and particularly from the late 1980s onward, the area around this base became ground zero for a wave of UFO sightings and extraterrestrial theories that became, over time, one of the most persistent cultural phenomena in modern American history. People reported seeing lights in the sky above the restricted zone, performing maneuvers that seemed impossible. Lights that moved too fast, that turned too sharply, that appeared and disappeared in ways that defied conventional explanation, and in the absence of any official acknowledgement of what was being tested at the facility, in the vacuum left by decades of official denial and non-answers, a theory emerged. The theory held that what people were seeing above the Nevada desert was not American technology at all, that the base was being used not just for classified aircraft testing, but for something far more extraordinary: the study and reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology, that captured vehicles of non-human origin were housed there, that the evidence of encounters between humanity and other civilizations was locked inside those hangars and those underground facilities, known to a tiny handful of human beings, and concealed from the rest of the world by a security apparatus so complete that even congressional oversight could not penetrate it. This theory did not remain on the fringes. It spread. It appeared in newspapers. It appeared in television programs. It appeared in major motion pictures. The installation, which was officially a blank space on the map, became one of the most famous locations in the world. And official Washington watched this development with an expression that was equal parts frustration and dark amusement, because what was actually happening above that dry lake bed was in many ways stranger and more impressive than the alien theory, even if it was entirely human in origin. What the strange lights in the sky above the restricted zone actually were, in virtually every documented case, were classified American aircraft. Aircraft that looked and behaved unlike anything in the public aviation world, because they were decades ahead of anything that had been revealed to the public. Aircraft built with shapes and materials and propulsion systems that were so far beyond what civilians knew existed that the gap between expectation and reality was large enough to generate its own mythology. Consider the timeline. The first classified aircraft tested at this location flew at altitudes and speeds that were genuinely without precedent in the late 1950s. The next generation of aircraft tested at the same location could fly nearly 3 times the speed of sound at the edge of the atmosphere. The generation after that was an aircraft so advanced in its stealth characteristics that when it was eventually revealed to the public, aviation experts described it as representing a generational leap in capability. Each time one of these programs was eventually declassified and revealed, the reaction was the same: stunned disbelief followed by the gradual realization that the United States had been operating this capability in complete secrecy for years, sometimes decades, before the public ever knew. And each revelation raised the same uncomfortable question. If they were doing that 20 years ago, and we are only finding out now, what are they doing right now that we will not find out about for another 20 years? That question has never been more relevant than it is today. Because the evidence gathered by independent researchers, aviation enthusiasts, satellite imagery analysts, and investigative journalists over the past decade makes one thing very clear: the pace of construction and activity at this facility has not slowed. It has accelerated. New structures have appeared. Runways have been extended and resurfaced. Hangar facilities that dwarf anything previously visible at the site have been constructed. The airspace restrictions have been periodically adjusted in ways that suggest not a facility in steady-state operation, but one that is actively, urgently working on something new. Something that requires more space, more infrastructure, more runway length, more security than what was needed before. What that something is, we will get to. But first, it is worth spending some time on the human dimension of this place. Because for all the technology, for all the secrecy, for all the hardware, this installation is ultimately a community. It is a place where human beings live and work and carry the weight of secrets that most of their fellow citizens will never understand. The workforce at this facility commutes in a way unlike any other workforce in the world. Every weekday morning, before dawn, a fleet of unmarked aircraft departs from a special terminal at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. These aircraft do not appear on any commercial flight tracking system. They have their own dedicated runway access, their own gates, their own security screening process, entirely separate from anything available to the general public. The aircraft themselves are white, mostly Boeing 737 variants, with no airline logos, no tail numbers that appear in any public registry, and no information posted anywhere about destinations or schedules. The employees who board those aircraft hold clearances that took years and sometimes over $100,000 of government resources to investigate and verify. They range from aeronautical engineers and materials scientists to mechanics, cooks, janitors, and logistics specialists. Some of them have worked at this facility for their entire careers. Some of them are on their first assignment. They travel together, land together, live in dormitory and housing facilities on the base during their work rotation, and return to their lives in Las Vegas or surrounding communities on weekends. While they are on site, their communications with the outside world are limited and monitored. Their families know they work somewhere classified. They do not know exactly where. They do not know exactly what. That is the agreement. That is the price of the clearance, and it is a price that many of them have paid for decades without complaint. Because the work is, by all accounts from those who have eventually been able to speak about it in limited ways, unlike anything else in the world. There is a culture at this facility that is different from any other military or government installation in the United States. It is a culture built around the absolute primacy of the mission, where the mission is defined as pushing the edge of what is aeronautically, technologically, and operationally possible as far and as fast as it can be pushed. The people who work there know, in a way that most workers in most places never experience, that what they are doing genuinely matters. That the aircraft they are building or testing or maintaining will one day represent the difference between an adversary knowing what the United States can do and an adversary not knowing. And in the world of strategic deterrence, that gap in knowledge is a gap in power. The test pilots who fly the aircraft developed at this location occupy a category of professional that has no real civilian equivalent. They are among the most skilled aviators in the world. They are also, necessarily, among the most psychologically disciplined. Because the nature of their work requires them to take aircraft that have never been flown before, push those aircraft to the edges of their performance envelopes, manage emergencies in vehicles with no operational history, and then land, debrief, and go back up the next morning without discussing what happened with anyone outside the program. The history of aviation testing at this location includes moments of extraordinary triumph and moments of profound tragedy. Aircraft that worked exactly as designed, and aircraft that failed in ways that cost test pilots their lives. And even those losses, those deaths in service of programs the public did not know about, had to be handled with extraordinary care. When a pilot died in a classified test program, the official cause of death, the one that appeared on documents available to the family, sometimes could not reflect the true circumstances. It could not reference the aircraft, it could not reference the location. It could not reference the program. The families of those pilots carried their grief in a privacy that was enforced not just by custom but by legal obligation. This is one of the most human costs of the world that exists behind these fences. Not the money, not even the secrecy itself, but the isolation that comes from being in possession of knowledge you cannot share with the people who love you. The pilots, the engineers, the technicians who have given their careers, and in some cases their lives, to this place, did so in a silence that history has only partially broken. Now let us talk about the programs, because this is where the story becomes almost incomprehensible in its ambition and its achievement. The first aircraft to be developed and tested at this location in the classified era was designated in a way that revealed almost nothing about its actual capabilities. It was referred to internally by a project name and an aircraft designation that meant nothing to outsiders. What it was, in plain terms, was a revolutionary high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. It could fly at altitudes above 70,000 feet. It could carry camera systems capable of photographing an object the size of a basketball from that altitude. It had a range that allowed it to depart from a base in friendly territory, penetrate deep into denied airspace, photograph targets across thousands of miles, and return, all without the enemy ever getting close enough to touch it. When this aircraft first flew over Soviet territory, American intelligence analysts described the imagery it returned as staggering in its completeness. In a single mission, the aircraft could photograph an area equivalent to several European countries. The Soviet military had been photographing its own territory for years and did not have imagery of this quality. The Americans now had a map of the Soviet military establishment more detailed than anything Moscow possessed about itself. But the program had a vulnerability that its designers understood from the beginning. The aircraft, for all its altitude and all its speed, was not invulnerable. Eventually, and the designers knew this day would come, eventually the Soviets would develop a missile capable of reaching it. And on that day, the program would be over. What happened on that day, when a Soviet surface-to-air missile brought one of these aircraft down over Soviet territory and the pilot was captured alive, created one of the most significant diplomatic crises of the Cold War. A crisis that was made worse by the fact that the United States government had spent years officially denying the aircraft existed. The cover story collapsed. The denial became untenable, and the world got its first real glimpse behind the curtain of this secret desert facility. But only a glimpse, because by the time the curtain was pulled back on that program, the next one was already well underway. The aircraft that came next was designed to be beyond the reach of any missile that existed or was likely to exist for the foreseeable future. It flew at speeds exceeding Mach 3. It flew at altitudes above 80,000 feet. It generated so much heat from aerodynamic friction that its skin had to be made from titanium rather than aluminum, because aluminum would have softened and failed at those temperatures. It required fuel that had to be specially formulated, because ordinary jet fuel would have vaporized in its tanks before the aircraft even reached cruising speed. In fact, this aircraft was so far ahead of its time that getting the titanium needed to build it required a covert procurement operation in itself. The primary global supplier of titanium at the time was the Soviet Union, so the United States, through a series of front companies and intermediary transactions, so elaborate they read like a spy novel, quietly purchased Soviet titanium to build the aircraft that would fly surveillance missions over Soviet territory. That is the kind of operational creativity that defines the culture of this place. Think about the sheer audacity of that. The Americans needed titanium. The best titanium in the world came from their primary adversary, so they bought it from them, and then they used it to build an aircraft that flew over that adversary's most sensitive military installations for years. The aircraft was eventually revealed to the public, but by that time the program that had replaced it was already operational, already flying, already doing things that would not be acknowledged for another decade. This is the rhythm of this place. This is how it works. One generation of technology is revealed at the same moment that the next generation is already flying in secret over the Nevada desert. The aircraft that most people are familiar with from the public acknowledgement era is the one that looked like nothing that had ever been seen in the sky before. An angular, faceted, geometrically strange shape that seemed to violate every conventional principle of aircraft design. It had no curves. It was built entirely from flat panels, meeting at precise angles, creating a surface that, to radar waves, appeared almost invisible. It was not fast. It was not designed to be fast. Speed was not its defense. Stealth was its defense. The ability to fly deep into defended airspace, deliver munitions with precision, and depart without ever triggering a radar return strong enough to generate a tracking solution. This aircraft, when it was finally revealed, was greeted with a disbelief that shifted quickly into wonder. Because people could see it, they could look at photographs of it, and even without knowing any of the technical details, they could tell, simply from looking at it, that it represented something categorically different from everything that had come before. The geometry was not the result of aesthetic choice. Every angle, every panel, every edge existed for a specific electromagnetic reason. The shape of the aircraft was a physical solution to the problem of radar detection, and that solution, developed in the desert over years of classified work, changed the entire framework of air power forever. After that aircraft came another, and this one, unlike its predecessors, was not revealed publicly for many years. When its existence was finally acknowledged, it was already approaching the end of its operational service life. It was larger, it flew higher. It had a range that allowed it to reach almost anywhere on the planet from a handful of carefully chosen bases. Its stealth characteristics were so refined that the radar cross-section, the effective size it presented to enemy radar, was described by engineers as roughly equivalent to a small bird. An aircraft with a wingspan exceeding 170 feet, presenting a radar signature the size of a sparrow. The engineering required to achieve that result represents one of the most impressive technical accomplishments in the history of military aviation, and it was done in secret. Designed in secret, built in secret, tested in secret, flown operationally in secret, until one day it was not a secret anymore. And then, once again, it was reasonable to ask the question that this place always generates. If that is what they were doing 20 years ago, what are they doing right now? The answer to that question, or as much of an answer as the available evidence permits, points to something that aviation analysts and defense researchers have been watching with increasing fascination over the past several years: the Next Generation Aircraft Program. The details are classified at the highest possible level. The official position of the Department of Defense is that a successor to the current generation of strategic aircraft is in development. A handful of budget documents, stripped of almost all identifying information, confirm that a classified air vehicle program exists and that it is receiving substantial funding. The dollar amounts involved, when analysts have been able to piece them together from fragments of public budget data, suggest a program of significant scale and complexity. Beyond that, the public record is essentially blank. But the physical record is not entirely blank. Satellite imagery of the facility in the Nevada desert has shown changes that are consistent with the testing of a new and very large aircraft. Runway extensions, new hangar construction at a scale that exceeds what was needed for previous programs. Ground support infrastructure consistent with a high-performance jet aircraft that may require different fueling, maintenance, or handling than what came before. Aviation enthusiasts with access to high-quality aircraft tracking and observation equipment have reported sightings of an aircraft over the Nevada desert and surrounding restricted airspace that does not match any known design. The shape described in those accounts is unlike anything in the public inventory of any air force in the world. The performance characteristics, estimated from visual observation and acoustic data, suggest an aircraft operating at the extreme edge of what current technology would permit. Or perhaps, given the history of this place, somewhat beyond that edge, there is something else worth discussing, something that expands the story of this installation beyond aircraft testing into territory that is even less well understood. Because over the decades, the mission of this facility has grown to encompass not just aircraft development, but a range of classified activities that span the full spectrum of advanced military technology. Electronic warfare systems have been developed and tested there. Directed energy weapons have been evaluated on its ranges. Unmanned vehicle programs, both aerial and potentially others, have used its infrastructure, and there are persistent accounts, from sources credible enough to take seriously, that some of the research conducted at this location operates at a level of classification above the standard hierarchy of secret designations. Programs that are acknowledged to exist at only the very highest levels of government and military authority. Programs whose very category of activity is classified, not just the specific details, but the type of thing being investigated. This layer of the story is the hardest to discuss with precision because, by definition, the evidence is sparse. What is knowable is limited, but the pattern is consistent enough and the source is credible enough that dismissing it entirely would be intellectually dishonest. There are things being done at this location that the United States government has made a deliberate and total decision to keep from public knowledge. The reasons for that decision are not necessarily sinister. The history of this place strongly suggests that the primary reason for the secrecy is competitive advantage. Every year that an adversary does not know about a capability is a year that the capability retains its full strategic value. The moment it is revealed, the adversary begins working on a countermeasure. The calculus of secrecy is the calculus of advantage. But the secrecy has costs beyond the ones already discussed. It has institutional costs. It has oversight costs, and it has democratic costs that are worth acknowledging even as we recognize the strategic reasons for them. In a democratic republic, the principle that the government derives its legitimacy from the informed consent of the governed creates an inherent tension with the idea of operations so secret that even elected representatives struggle to oversee them. Congressional intelligence committees have clearances that allow them to be briefed on classified programs. But the briefings they receive are controlled by the executive branch and the intelligence community. The question of whether that oversight is genuinely effective or largely symbolic is one that people who have spent careers on both sides of that relationship answer very differently. What is certain is that the decisions made inside those fences in the Nevada desert, the decisions about what to develop, what to test, what to deploy, and at what cost, those decisions shape the security environment of the entire planet. They shape it in ways that the people most directly affected by them, ordinary citizens in every country, can never fully evaluate because they can never fully see. That is not a comfortable thought, but it is an honest one. An honesty about what this place is, what it represents, what it has accomplished, and what questions it raises, is the only way to understand it properly. Now let us go back to something concrete. Let us go back to the people, because there is a chapter of this story that involves specific individuals whose accounts, carefully given and carefully restricted, have added more texture to the picture of this installation than any satellite image or budget document ever could. There have been, over the decades, a number of individuals who worked at this facility and who, after the expiration of classification restrictions or through carefully negotiated disclosures, have spoken publicly about what they experienced there. Former pilots who flew classified aircraft from that airfield. Former engineers who worked on programs that have subsequently been partially declassified. Former security personnel who have described the nature and the intensity of the protective measures around the site. What emerges from those accounts, taken together, is a portrait of a workplace that is simultaneously extraordinary and mundane. Extraordinary in the work being done, and mundane in the daily reality of being a human being living inside a fence. The food in the cafeteria. The camaraderie of coworkers who share a bond forged not just by shared work but by shared secrecy. The particular loneliness of being unable to talk about your day with your spouse. The satisfaction of solving a problem that no one has solved before. The grief when a colleague dies in a test accident and the official story cannot acknowledge what actually happened. One former test pilot, speaking years after the programs he flew had been at least partially declassified, described the experience of flying an aircraft that the rest of the world did not know existed. He described the sensation of being in possession of a secret so complete that even the aircraft he was sitting in, the physical object surrounding him, was unknown to the world below. He was flying through airspace over a country that had no idea an aircraft of this type existed. He was carrying out a mission for a government that would deny his presence if anything went wrong, and he said that the combination of professional pride and existential isolation was unlike anything else he had ever experienced. He also said something else, something that sticks with you when you think about the full sweep of what this place has produced and what it has cost. He said that the people he worked with, the engineers who designed the aircraft, the mechanics who maintained it, the operations staff who planned the missions, were the most talented, most dedicated group of professionals he had ever encountered in his career, and that none of them would ever receive public recognition for what they accomplished. No parade, no medal ceremony that anyone outside a handful of classified briefing rooms would ever know about. No acknowledgement in the history books, at least not by name, not for many years. They did what they did because they believed in the mission, because they understood that the work mattered, and because the culture of that place, the culture of absolute commitment to the edge of the possible, was its own reward in a way that is difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced it. That culture is worth reflecting on, because it is in many ways the most durable thing this facility has produced. The specific aircraft are remarkable. The technologies are extraordinary. But the culture, the way of working, the absolute refusal to accept that a problem cannot be solved, the willingness to attempt things that conventional wisdom says are impossible, that culture has been built and maintained and passed from one generation of workers to the next, across 7 decades of classified achievement. It is the culture of what the military calls a special access program environment, where the normal bureaucratic friction of large organizations is reduced as much as possible and replaced with a clarity of purpose and a speed of execution that organizations 10 times the size cannot match. Small teams, tight security, direct lines of authority, an atmosphere where the best idea wins regardless of where it comes from in the hierarchy, where a junior engineer can challenge an assumption made by a senior program manager and be taken seriously because on the desert floor, the only thing that matters is whether the aircraft flies. This culture did not emerge by accident. It was deliberately cultivated by the people who built this place, who understood that the technical ambition of their mission required a human environment to match. An environment where extraordinary people could do extraordinary things without the friction, the politics, and the bureaucratic inertia that slows down most large organizations. And it worked. The results speak for themselves across 7 decades of classified achievement. Now there is one more dimension of this story that deserves serious attention, the international dimension, because the United States is not the only country that operates facilities of this type. Russia has its own equivalent. A network of closed cities, research institutes, and test ranges where advanced military technology is developed in conditions of secrecy that in some respects rival and in some respects exceed what exists in Nevada. China has made enormous investments in the infrastructure of classified military research and testing. Its test ranges in the interior of the country, visible in satellite imagery, but almost completely opaque in terms of their specific programs and activities, are producing aircraft and weapons systems at a pace that has genuinely surprised Western analysts. The competition that drove the creation of this facility in the Cold War era has not ended. It has evolved. The adversaries have changed. The technologies at the center of the competition have evolved. The pace of the competition has in some ways accelerated, driven by the increasing speed of technological development across multiple domains simultaneously. Artificial intelligence, hypersonic propulsion, directed energy, space-based systems, autonomous vehicles. Every one of these domains is a potential area of decisive advantage if one side can develop and deploy operational capability before the other. And every one of these domains is almost certainly being pursued in the classified research and testing environment at this facility. The stakes are, if anything, higher now than they were during the Cold War. Because while the Cold War was ultimately bilateral, a contest between two superpowers with relatively stable and predictable strategic calculations, the current environment is more complex, more actors, more potential vectors of strategic surprise, more domains in which a technological breakthrough could reshape the balance of power in ways that move faster than political and diplomatic systems can process. The men and women working behind those fences in Nevada are working against that backdrop, working on technologies that may determine whether the United States retains the strategic advantages that have been the foundation of its international position for 3/4 of a century. The pressure is real, the mission is real, and the secrecy, for all the questions it raises, serves a purpose that is real. Here is something else that is real: the American public's relationship with this place. The fact that a stretch of Nevada highway became known to the entire world as a destination for people drawn by curiosity about a location their own government would not acknowledge. The fact that a culture of fascination and speculation grew up around that blank space on the map and eventually became one of the most persistent features of American popular culture. The fact that a small, unincorporated community in the Nevada desert became internationally famous because of its proximity to a fence line. All of this speaks to something deep and genuine in the human response to secrecy. We are drawn to what is hidden. We want to know what is behind the door that is locked, what is in the room that is closed, what is on the map that is blank. It is not irrational. It is one of the most basic expressions of human curiosity. And the specific form that curiosity has taken in response to this place, the theories, the cultural products, the pilgrimages to the perimeter, all of it speaks to something that goes beyond simple nosiness. It speaks to a genuine and legitimate desire to understand the world that one lives in, to see the full picture rather than the carefully edited version that official sources provide. The classified programs that have been developed at this facility have benefited the United States enormously. They have shaped global power in ways that are measurable, consequential, and in many cases genuinely positive from the standpoint of international stability and the prevention of conflict. But the culture of total secrecy, the reflexive classification of anything connected to this location, the institutional resistance to public accountability, carries its own costs. And it is possible to acknowledge both of those things simultaneously, to recognize that the secrecy serves genuine strategic purposes and that it also generates a democratic deficit that matters. The most intellectually honest position is this one: this facility is one of the most remarkable places on Earth. What has been accomplished there represents a sustained achievement of human technical and organizational capability that has few equals in history. The people who built it, who work there, who gave careers and in some cases lives in service of its mission, deserve a recognition that most of them will never publicly receive. And the questions it raises about accountability, about oversight, about the relationship between democratic government and the secret activities carried out in its name, those questions deserve serious engagement rather than reflexive dismissal. There is one final element of this story to address: the future. Because this place is not a museum. It is not a monument to past achievement. It is an active facility operating at, by all available evidence, a higher tempo today than it has operated at in years. The construction activity visible in satellite imagery over the past decade suggests a facility in active expansion, not consolidation. The classified budget lines that analysts have been able to partially identify suggest ongoing investment at a scale consistent with a major new program, or possibly multiple programs, in active development and testing. The geopolitical context, the renewed great power competition, the accelerating pace of Chinese military technological development, the Russian investment in advanced weapon systems, the emergence of new technological domains with strategic implications, all of this creates a demand signal for exactly the kind of work that this facility exists to do. Push the edge, develop the capability, test it, deploy it, before the adversary knows it exists. That work is happening right now, today, as you are watching this, behind a fence in the Nevada desert, in a location that does not appear on any public map, using technologies and approaches that most of the world will not know about for years, or possibly decades. The next chapter of American military technological advantage is being written. The aircraft that